Hello and welcome to Opposition Territory here at the Philadelphia Sports Table Podcast Show, the longest-running weekly Philly sports podcast show in the world. This April, it'll be 13 years. I cannot believe that I'm still in front of this microphone doing this after 13 years, and my co-host as well. Thank you very much, Maggie. I appreciate that. But yes, I want to introduce our guest this week on Opposition Territory as we dive into the New York Mets offseason and what we can expect from this team here in 2026. It's been a real interesting time for the New York Mets and Mets Nation overall. We have, from a pod of their own, over at homerunapplesauce.com, we've got our good friend Maggie Wiggin. Maggie, thanks so much for jumping on to dive into the Mets with us this week.
Always, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here.
I love having you on. You are a plethora of knowledge when it comes to the New York Mets, and we're certainly going to get to the Mets, but I wanted to first get into a storyline that certainly has some traction during this MLB offseason, and it really deals with impending what I think is going to be a salary cap here. And it's a subject we've talked about on our regular show. Wanted to get your take, Maggie, because after what the Dodgers did this offseason with Kyle Tucker and that massive contract, it just seems inevitable that this is going to happen for Major League Baseball at this point. Do you think we're inevitably going to have a salary cap in Major League Baseball? And should it happen, in your opinion?
I mean, there are many arguments to make that it's inevitable, but I'd also say that it's been inevitable for 30 years at this point. And when Kyle Tucker forced the question, before Tucker forced the question, Juan Soto forced the question, and then Shohei Ohtani was forcing the question, and Aaron, nothing about this conversation feels substantively different about the last several years of conversations around a salary cap, which doesn't mean that it's not going to happen, but it's more just like, I don't necessarily buy into the idea that we are now in some sort of different special salary cap situation, although the owners would love us to think that. Because I think they are really hoping that they go into this labor situation with the assumption being from the get-go that there's going to be a salary cap, and then they just get to iron out the details.
I do wonder really quick, though. I think you make a great point. I do wonder, though, how the smaller market teams are feeling that squash even more after this Kyle Tucker deal. And that's where I have that feeling that we may see this gaining even more traction. Whether or not it actually happens within the next CBA, who the hell knows? But that's what, because of that squash with the smaller market teams, that's my feeling around it.
I would say, to me, I think this is where some of my cynicism comes in, because I think that small market teams would feel that squash if their main goal was winning.
Right.
But we've never seen any evidence to that. And a lot of teams that like to call themselves small markets are playing in actually very large markets. Teams will love to tell you that they're flat broke and refuse to show any evidence to that fact. And every time some team does, for whatever reason, have to open their books, lo and behold, they're actually doing pretty well for themselves. So
Pittsburgh Pirates,
I feel like ultimately, if there's not a salary cap, it's going to be for the highly cynical reason that it's unlikely that the union would agree to any cap without a floor. And the floor is certainly going to be low enough to be embarrassing for the sport, but it cannot possibly be low enough to let the Rockies and the White Sox and the Pirates continue operating the way they have. And they want to operate the way they have. They make a lot of money that way. They don't win a lot of baseball games, but that's not their goal. So to me, I feel like the wild card in all of this is that the smallest market teams, or who likes to present themselves as the smallest market teams, they might be in a situation where they would actually have to spend more on payroll. And I don't think they want that at all.
It's a great point.
I think at the end of the day, if there is no salary cap, it's going to be because low key, all the owners are doing really well right now and making $1 gazillion. And the more we get into changing salary structure, I think that they, as relatively financially conservative folks, that might actually make them a little nervous.
It's a great point. It absolutely is. Folks, let us know what you're thinking about this. Leave us a comment if you are watching on YouTube. Leave a comment below. What do you think about a possible Major League Baseball salary cap? We would absolutely love to hear from you here at the PST Podcast Show. And Maggie, can you let everybody know where they can find you on the interwebs out there if they want to connect with you, if they want to listen to the podcast? You all do such an excellent job. Let everybody know where they can find you.
So I'm on Blue Sky at Maggie162. The show, A Pod of Their Own, is also on Blue Sky. That's our handle, A Pod of Their Own. And also on Twitter. But I think most of us do our kind of active engagement around sports and with our fans on Blue Sky. We are also at homerunapplesauce.com. And you can find us on all of your favorite podcast apps.
Absolutely. Always great content over there, folks. All right, now let's get into this New York Mets offseason and what we can expect from this team, Maggie. Look, last year before the season started, had you on the podcast here. We talked about Juan Soto, the excitement surrounding him coming to New York and within this Mets organization, what he was going to do, what he was going to mean for the team, and how he was just the latest and greatest piece for the Mets. And he was that new shiny gem coming in, paid a ton of money for him, and rightfully so. There was so much excitement within Mets Nation. And then, as we know, last season for the Mets was just kind of just meh for the Mets for a variety of reasons. I'll put that caveat, of course, out there. So I'm wondering, as we're reflecting on this past offseason as well, I'm wondering how you've been viewing it, because like with the Mets acquiring some pretty nice pieces and players over the course of the past, couple months here, after that high of last offseason, how do you think these two offseasons, the two past offseasons here for the Mets, are different, or are they similar in a certain situation? Because we have a team that's really spending a lot of money. Last year didn't really net the results that Mets Nation wanted, but this year, again, all in. Like, how is it different or the same in your opinion?
These have been super different off seasons in a lot of ways. I mean, the main thing is that and I think why it felt so top of the world, after signing Soto and going into 2025 was that it was a real additive season. The Mets team largely stayed the same except for adding Juan Soto. And I love that math.
Right.
But as it turned out, if anybody had guessed what the problem going into last season was going to be, the pitching might be a little bit of a house of cards, and somebody blew on that house of cards and it fell all the way down.
Right.
So it's, it's nice that at least Soto wasn't the problem because we've got him around for a while longer. But, it was a huge blow, I think, to fan ego last season of just feeling like we really had things worked out and then not remotely. So this is a super different season because obviously we've added a lot of pieces, but there was also loss, and not just a little bit, but a ton, almost the whole, half the starting lineup has been turned over.
Yeah.
And the Mets haven't had, especially on the position player front, and Mets haven't had a turnaround like a turnover like that in a very, very long time. So there's sort of this this emotional foundation that's been very challenging. I think it's not just any random guys who were leaving. It's, Brandon Nimmo was the longest tenured Met.
Yeah.
And both Diaz and Alonso were huge fan favorites for very specific reasons.
I was shocked when Pete Alonso left.
Yeah,
Honestly, I was very shocked by that.
It was, man, that was rough. And I wouldn't say at that point I wasn't exactly shocked because I felt like the team had been sort of telescoping it all off season, but it was still it was just a massive change, for the first time in 6+ years.
Yeah.
To have a Pete Alonso-less Mets team. And I do mean the only time, because that guy's never hurt. He was always on that team, always in that lineup. And it's a huge change. And I think that's a hard thing to sort of manage your feelings while still sort of rationally thinking about how the roster comes together. But and it was not improved by the fact that all these players left, lots and lots of players left. And for about the first 2 months of the offseason, it was Jorge Polanco. And so we had this really low point for a while where, we were going on A Pod of Their Own. David Stearns is killing me slowly. Like, what is happening right now? And then, but there was then this flurry of activity, lots of formal apologies to David Stearns over the podcast, as is often the case. And, now it's sort of like taking a step back. It almost feels like we had a fairly normal offseason. It was just chunked into like everybody leaves and now we sign everybody.
Yeah.
But it's still, it's hard to really wrap my mind around what this team is going to look and feel like going into the season, because I don't know any of these guys.
Yeah, it's a really good segue into the next topic here, Maggie, too, because in terms of following, especially teams in the NL East that I'm following and what they're doing during the course of their offseason, it makes me wonder what phase the Mets are truly in right now based on this offseason and based on that phase, what actually is their window? Is this more of a retool or a reloading on the fly? And I've actually heard some people say this offseason that this is somewhat of a quote rebuild, which I don't necessarily know if I agree with that. A rebuild, a retool, a reload. They're all very, in my opinion, different. I wonder how, Steve Cohen, like his willingness and desire to spend a ton of money changes what actually constitutes a retool or a reload, and inevitably what that means for this team here. What are your thoughts on like that phase that the Mets are in right now? Is it a retool, a reload? Like what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, a lot of the kind of conversations around tear downs, I think come back to this idea that hasn't really actually been all that effective in baseball for like the last 10 years, which is this idea of like running your team into the ground for a few years, picking up your elite draft picks, and then being good. And the thing is, like, it was working when it was only the Cubs doing it. It was working when it was only the Astros doing it. Yeah. And then everybody does it. Now it doesn't work anymore. You lose 95 games and your pick is number 8 and your team sucks just as much as they did last year. Like,
you can only copycat so much.
Yeah. And I also, like, again, coming back to the cynicism where, like, I think most of this idea of like tear down, rebuild is really just about clearing payroll, operating at as low a payroll as you can get away with. And then maybe if you think you have like a perfect opening window, then, that's when the typical team will then like spend a little bit of money.
Yeah.
And I think like, you and I are really lucky because our teams don't play that game.
Right.
Like
right.
they don't like pretend that the only way you can get good is by getting rid of all your good players.
Right.
And I think more and more fans are becoming aware that this is all just like a nonsense shell game and coming around on it. But, in terms of what the Mets are doing, and, I think like it's like teams like the Mets and the Dodgers and the Phillies should never be tearing it all down and rebuilding. And the Mets have proven actually very well that you can wholesale change your roster and not stop being competitive throughout.
Right.
And this also it kind of goes against the idea that you need to be like trading a lot of players over time, like, that they should have like traded all their players at the middle of the season last year and gotten lots of prospects. Like, no, they got prospects like steadily over time, trading away like medium and occasionally good players in certain moments, but they never did this like full on tear down, get rid of everybody, stock up a lot on prospects in this one moment. Like, it should always be this like gradual, like you should always be like trading away players you don't need anymore and bringing in new prospects. And like, there should always be this kind of constant like up and down of like bringing in the right people and moving out the other people.
And not shocking the system. Yes.
And I think like it was clear with the way the roster was built last year that they had limited flexibility. They had lots of players who were sort of hemmed into certain roles because of their own limitations, often defensively, or their aging. And I think that was the idea, a big part of the idea. And like David Stearns talked a lot about like run prevention being a big focus. But I think the larger focus when I think about what moves they made for the roster was about flexibility.
Yeah.
And that ultimately is, I think, what the team is trying to do now. It's not necessarily like trying to get better or worse. Obviously, always trying to get better, but
right.
more about thinking about its overall construction and trying to move in a different direction that allows for just more options
Yeah,
as the
absolutely.
season goes on.
Yeah, there's always moving pieces year after year, off season after off season, a lot of moving pieces. Again, folks, we're talking to Maggie Wiggin from A Pod of Their Own over at homerunapplesauce.com. We are going to take a break here. And when we get back, we've got more Mets talk coming your way and some NL East talk. Stick with us. All right, we're back with our good friend Maggie Wiggin here as we are diving into the New York Mets on this Opposition Territory podcast. So, Maggie, I want to get into some player-focused storylines here as we're looking towards what this Mets season could be and what the personnel is really going to look like as well. So let's start off by talking about which Mets player could completely change the upcoming season and narrative if things click. Do you have a player in mind who really fits in this particular category here? Who would that be and why?
Well, I think about a lot of the changes and a lot of that have happened since last year and the big issues of last year. And I go to Freddie Peralta because I think ultimately, the collapse that we saw from the Mets last year, I was almost entirely a pitching collapse. It's really easy to point to certain position players who underperformed here and there, but I cannot tell you how many August games I sat there and watched the Mets score 8 runs, and I still turned that off before I had to watch them lose a game where they scored 8 runs. It happened so many times. And really, what this team has missed since Jacob deGrom is an ace. And I know Freddie Peralta is not Jacob deGrom, and I don't mean to imply that he needs to be that.
But
or the team needs him to be, but just someone who is used to being at the top of the rotation, who sees that as a role on the team in and of itself.
Yeah.
And I think Peralta is the kind of guy who can do that. And he doesn't have to put up a 2.5 ERA to be a leader and to be that lockdown piece of a rotation that can stop the bleeding.
Right. I when I look at this Mets team and I see this roster, and we talked before the break, a lot of new faces. There's going to be some excitement for Mets fans, and I think even again fans like myself that look at the NL East in terms of the competition, and we're certainly going to get into that in a bit. But I'm wondering which Mets player, though, do you think is actually under the most pressure from fans and the front office to get to that either next echelon or to make sure that they are consistently doing what they need to do with regard to their role? So which player's under the most pressure from the fan base and the front office?
Well, we've had our kind of 2 young infielders for a couple years now, and that's Vientos and Beatty. And, both of them are still on the team with all of the upheaval that's happened, despite neither of them having that perfect match for a spot on the team. And I think both of them are in a real put up or shut up kind of year. And I like them both. I say put up or shut up with love. But, they're very different players, but they're also seen as sort of fitting a lot of the same roles. I mean, mostly third base. And I think for both of them, they're not as young as we feel like they are. They're both, I want to say, in their 4th year.
Yeah.
And so really now is the time, and the Mets have made it perfectly clear that they are not, they're not going to keep folks around who aren't doing the job that the Mets want them to do. And I think especially when it comes to thinking about mid-season acquisitions and that kind of thing, either one of those guys is a potential trade piece. And I would just be eating my Wheaties if I were those guys, because I think really they need to show this year. There's not going to be another opportunity. This year, they have to demonstrate not just that they are everyday players, but that they're everyday players in a role, in a specific role. We need to see Mark Vientos, able to DH on a regular basis and come off the bench like that and hit the way he has shown at times before. Beatty needs to be able to play a position smoothly every day and keep the bat above average in order to make himself useful. Both of the both of these guys really need to be able to do that, because we've also seen both of them do absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to watch those players for sure. And, just how they can potentially even develop more. Like you said, been on the team 4 years at this point. Who knows what's going to really happen with them? Mets fans really going to be keeping their eye on those two players for sure. But look, as we're moving along, Maggie, all of our teams that we follow, maybe aside from the Dodgers, can't get everything that they want every single year in the off season. So I'm also wondering too, what's one move you wish the Mets would have actually made this off season? They weren't able to maybe get done. What's that one move that you wish that they had made that didn't happen, didn't come to fruition?
So my heart wants to say letting Pete walk, because,
Yeah.
I think he could be incredible on this team. And I'll tell you what, I think he's going to be perfectly serviceable in the last year of that contract.
Yeah.
But my answer for this one is actually going to be letting Diaz walk. And it's easy to, like, Diaz chose the Dodgers. He did not give the Mets a chance to match their offer.
Right.
But the Mets had been spending the last several weeks talking about how they don't want to spend money. They don't want to give long-term contracts. And I think that poisoned the well. And I imagine that they were giving that vibe to him well before the season also, of like, I don't know. And like, the move that they should have made was not doing that thing.
Right.
the move that they should have made was being aggressive and, and serious with Diaz about being a contender. Because I look at this team as constructed, and I think that seems like a team where having a lockdown closer could be the difference between making the playoffs and not.
Yeah.
And Weaver, I think is fine. Sure.
Fine.
What's the other one? Devin Williams. Okay, fine. Like, we'll take the Yankees bullpen and we'll put them in Citi Field and hope for the best. Like, I mean, they're good pitchers. I don't want to like imply that they're not, but then you also look at the kinds of seasons that Edwin Diaz is capable of, and they're just different players. Like, the word for what Diaz does shouldn't be called a closer. There needs to be something else for it.
Yeah.
And there's only 2 or 3 of those guys in baseball, and the Mets used to have one and now they don't. And I hate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, look, I can't wait for this season to start. We all can't wait for this season to start. And for us to actually see what this NL East is going to look like. And I'll tell you right now, while it stresses me out, I always love to see good back and forth between top teams in the NL East. The Mets are certainly up there. Phillies are up there. Braves may have some issues, as they're certainly, the injury bug has certainly hit Atlanta over these past couple of seasons here. But to close this out here, like, I'm wondering, what does a good division, a good knockdown, drag out division kind of look like for you? Is it the Mets battling with the Braves? Is it the Mets going back and forth with the Phillies for that first place spot here? What are your thoughts in terms of like what an awesome NL East is going to look like this year in terms of the back and forth?
I mean, our number one choice for a good NL East is like Mets by like 20 to 30 games.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
But
yes,
if we're talking second best,
yes.
I mean, what I feel like we haven't had for a while is a nice 3-way race. I feel like it's always one team falling out of it early.
Yep.
And like, I don't think the Braves look very, very intimidating right now, but I also think that they can always get in there and surprise you.
Yep.
And I think like if the Braves can kind of pick up their end of the bargain, then I think we could have that, because the Phillies, sorry about Bo Bichette. Sorry, not sorry, but like,
exactly.
Like the Phillies have certainly like not gotten worse.
Right.
And they handily beat the Mets last year. So clearly like that matchup I think is going to be a really good one. And I do sort of hope the Braves show up just enough to like keep it interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I at the end of the day, I really think it is going to be Mets Phillies going back and forth. I think it's going to be real interesting.
I thought Miami might, like at the end of last season, I was like,
I know
he's going to play, and they're like, nah, we don't want to.
Exactly.
We don't want to do that. We don't want a salary floor.
We're a small market team. Why do we want to do anything different?
Tiny Miami.
Exactly.
Miami.
She is Maggie Wiggin, folks. Again, a pod of their own podcast. Check them out on the interwebs out there. Also, homerunappleSauce.com. Check out all their content. Maggie, it was great talking to you. Always love having you on. Please come back, join us, talk more MLB, more Mets. I'd love to have you back on the show, my friend.
Anytime. Always a pleasure.